Thank you. Well, this is very much a personal story, and personal as in the individual. So it's about me and my family. And yet it touches on the political, the legal, the constitutional, the religious, ethical, and lastly, medical. We're at the bottom. Physical and mental health of the female is the last thing that's considered because of our legislation. I obviously haven't done this before, but I felt this would be a safe place to share my experience. And I believe it is important, as I'm sure you all do, that a woman should feel safe with her medical choices. And as strange as it is for me to address medical experts, it's no less strange the way that Ireland addresses the issue of fatal fetal abnormality. My story began 13 years ago when I was given the results that my baby had a chromosomal abnormality incompatible with survival. Nothing has changed since that time. And if I was to present, which is most unlikely, but if somebody younger was to present today, the fate would in fact be worse. I won't be naming any hospitals or consultants, and I hope this doesn't confuse, because in fact there was about 5 hospitals involved, and I will interchange the word doctor with consultant, and if I use he or she, it makes no difference. But just to give you an idea of the course of my treatment. So this is a glimpse really of what it's like from the mother's side of the desk. It was New Year's Day 2002, and I was just over 12 weeks pregnant, so I felt safe being able to tell my other 2 children, who were 10 and 12-year-old boys, the good news. They were fascinated. At that stage, I discovered I was having twins, and they were quite excited about the idea that one could be a girl. When the boys were back in school after Christmas, I had an appointment for an amnio. My partner and I went to the unit together. It's probably helpful at this point to say that the amnio was not in the hospital that I was going to have the baby in, and the doctor was not my consultant. We were so naive that, and this will give you an idea, I suppose, of what parents are like, that when the doctor explained the dilemma of taking an amnio with twins and how you would not know which one had a chromosomal abnormality if either had, we were surprised. But that's obviously very straightforward to you. And during the ultrasound, though, the doctor exclaimed at the screen that one twin had died at 8 weeks. At that stage, I was 14 weeks. And they said that makes it easier. So one of our twins was dead, and it made it easier. That felt kind of like a very insensitive and crazy thing to say. But perhaps out of consolation, the doctor then said that the surviving twin was kicking like a horse. So we left in a bit of a daze, and but the idea that one was kicking like a horse gave me some relief. Back at home, my children wanted to know if I'd found out whether they were going to have a sister or 2, and I told them the sad news about the other twin. The next day, I would tell you this by way of giving you context of what it's like in a family setting, because when the debate or the discussion is spoken about in the media, it's always just the mother, and it's pro-choice or pro-life, and it's very black and white. But I think it's important to know how the decision was arrived at. I was collecting my little boy and his friend from school, and I strapped them into the back seat. And as I was driving off, the little friend said to me that their teacher had asked the class to pray for me and for my little boy's baby brother or sister. And I got such a fright and caught sight of my little boy in the mirror with tears rolling down his face. And that's sort of very much the human side of it. And again, I suppose the consoling that the teacher would do something like that, but it made it very real. The image of the other one kicking like a horse remained with me for the next 3 weeks, and I counted down every day as if it would never come. I got a call from the hospital on the day I expected, and the caller said I had to come in to see the doctor, but I begged her to tell me over the phone I knew something must be wrong, and I felt panicked. My partner and I drove to the hospital that afternoon. The stairs took forever. The room was small. My file rested on the desk between us. I tried to read the report upside down. I was convinced it would be something, hopefully just minor surgery. But the doctor mentioned chromosomes and explained about cells and extra cells. And then said the words Edwards syndrome, which I'd never heard before. I kept hoping that the word minor surgery might be mentioned. And no, they explained about organs not being fully formed and how they generally don't survive after birth, or that I may miscarry. All of these words flew over my head, and I was sure there was a mix-up. And I asked if it could be rechecked, and the doctor explained that they were already having that done in a Scottish hospital. And then the question started rolling around in my head. You know, what is fatal? I mean, how could they be so sure? And they explained a little bit more about it to me, and that I would be getting, you know, I would get genetic counselling, and just a lot of information that I couldn't take in. But then I asked the doctor, well, where will I go now? Well, you know, I assumed there was a special ward that you might be checked into, as this was also fatal. But every question was answered with no, 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 and not in this jurisdiction. And suddenly I felt I wasn't a patient, I was a nuisance. I was a nuisance, and not because of what the doctor was saying, but I suppose my term as a pregnant mother was over, and I don't know what I took away with me. I went with armfuls of notes, and I didn't know what I was going to do. The second report came the following afternoon, which confirmed the diagnosis. The following morning, I read the headlines in the Irish Times. Taoiseach announces date for referendum on abortion. And I suddenly saw the hypocrisy. For the first time in my life, the issue of abortion had a material impact. In fact, I wasn't in the country in 1983, so I didn't have to vote. I didn't have to make that choice. And now I was that person I didn't even have a choice. So that's when I wrote my letter, an impassioned letter addressing the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, the Attorney General, just to say something. And the letter wasn't published for a couple of months later. So by then I had been in contact with doctors, consultants. I won't be too specific about this. And suffice to say, we felt that a bad situation was being made tolerable because I didn't have to take a flight. I had to leave the jurisdiction but cross the border. And at this time, I suppose, it was really only family and a couple of friends who knew about the tragedy. It would come later when the letter was published, when it all became public, that I learned that there was tremendous support, but also that there were a few people who would judge you and suggest that you had done the wrong thing, not knowing that I had 2 young children to rear, and not knowing that I knew our family best. So we arrived at the hospital and found the maternity wing. And to my surprise, I just had to say my name, and a nurse smiled at me and said they were expecting me, said she was sorry to hear, and led me to a private room where my partner went off to a hotel. The next morning, the obstetrician came in to see me. He explained that I would have a general anaesthetic, and when I awoke, it would all be over. I asked him if I could see the baby, and he replied, "Oh no, you have a scan photo." And let me see. Oh, that's a bit later. I said I didn't have a photo, and that my doctor in Dublin said I could see the baby, So he paused and said, "Well, that is safer then, and you won't need me. The midwives can attend to you if you would like to do it that way." So perhaps this would be common practice, that there would be this discussion, but I worried afterwards that maybe if we hadn't had it, I would never have realized, I would never have seen the baby. I was given a tablet and moved later in the day to a delivery suite with a sofa bed for my partner. Someone explained to him that it was deliberately far from the labour ward so that I would not hear any babies crying. Everything they did for me was thoughtful, and soon after midnight the labour started. It wasn't painful, obviously, like my first two, but that's what I was actually worried about, going through the pain and not having a baby at the end of it. I was afraid to look when I was told it was all over, but the nurse said it was okay and placed our lifeless baby on my thigh. He was very small and very red. I could see that the upper lip had not formed and there was a hole in his face, but his cheekbones were just like his father's, and I stroked them. The nurse took him away to prepare. I slept a little, and when I awoke, another nurse asked if I would like a photograph. I didn't know what to say. I didn't think I would want a photograph of my dead baby, but I always regret that now. She came back with a set of little footprints on the back of a card, and that is all I have to remember him now. Later on, somebody visited me from a group called A or C. It's a counselling service for women who have had terminations, and they gave me a brochure which explained the feelings I might experience and the questions I might have about burial. They were very compassionate and would have helped me organise a funeral if I lived in Northern Ireland. The hospital gave me some blue and white baby blankets, and we took him away in a little white coffin the size of a shoebox. We visited some graveyards down here, and it took some days to find somewhere just right for him. It was a very moving service at the graveside, and the minister remembered the names I had given the twins. A few days later, I was very weak and bleeding heavily. I told my doctor, and he said that was normal, but that if it continued, to let him know. It did, and he took me into hospital for D&C. During my admission, I found it very upsetting that I had to lie and say I had a miscarriage. There's a very different response to if you have a miscarriage. It was something I had to say to some parents at the school. The secrecy and anxiety I felt really compounded the sadness of the tragedy. And the next day after the procedure, the doctor told me that I had come in just in time. Again, these things only hit me afterwards, that how important it should be, how important it is that you should be looked after by the medical experts that know you within your community, local to your home, because I had obviously left the hospital with still tissue intact. I'm not sure what exactly it was. That was February 2002. In March 2002, that letter where I explained about fetal abnormality and how there is no treatment for mothers here in Ireland, that was published in the Irish Times. And it was within 2 weeks of the referendum. And the wording of that referendum, it was about amending the Eighth Amendment and on the unborn. And it was actually very confusing. People didn't know whether yes was a no or no was a yes. But the reaction to the letter caused me deeper shock, and with the newspapers and TV and radio wanting to have interviews, I actually thought I'd have police coming knocking on my door. It was that sort of worry you have because of our law. The only good thing about the coverage was that it brought forward other people who had the same experience, and it was no longer a hidden problem. I heard other women speak. Though their voices were disguised on the radio, all of us were hiding our identity as if we were criminals. They told of going to England and coming home with a baby corpse in a carry-on bag, and others had the cremated remains posted home in jiffy bags by couriers. The humanity of our law is fathomless, the inhumanity rather. And a day or two later, the masters of the 3 maternity hospitals were giving a press conference to advocate a vote in favour of the amendment which would include suicidal ideation. None of them are here now. The journalist Nell McCafferty asked them what they would say to Deirdre de Barra, which was my name in Irish then. Each one replied that she should have been treated here in Dublin. In fact, the referendum wording did not countenance anything to do with fetal abnormality. So in effect, the 3 masters had to contradict the vote that they were advocating by agreeing that the treatment should have been here. Many more column inches were devoted to Deirdre de Barra, which protected me and my children from attention. In June 2002, I was contacted by the Irish Family Planning Association. I was tracked down through somebody whom they knew and asked if I would take a case or lobby in Brussels. It was too public for me, and in the end, it was a British barrister who got in touch and promised me anonymity by taking a case to the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. So for 4 years, the correspondence continued between her, my having to relive the details and explanations and clarifications of everything in answer to the State Council. So the wounds never healed. In June 2006, 4 years later, I got a call to say, from the barrister, to say that the court had ruled the case inadmissible because I had not gone directly to the Irish courts as a pregnant woman and sought a remedy there. It was a double rejection by the Irish state. The argument that the state used, based on the constitutional expert at the time, who is now a High Court judge, was that because I hadn't exhausted the legal remedies here, that the case couldn't be heard in Europe. But that constitutional expert had some sympathetic points to make. He said the definition of unborn had not been legally challenged here, and it would have been helpful had I taken a case. And he also said that it was unlikely that Article 40.33, which is the amendment on the unborn, would not be applied with remorseless logic in a case such as mine. So that was 2006. In 2007, almost a year later, news came of a 17-year-old called Miss D, who was in the care of the HSE, was pregnant and, again, a wanted baby, was diagnosed with anencephaly. Because she was in the care of the HSE, she wasn't in a position to travel of her own volition. And so just as had been guaranteed by the state's defence in my case, if she went straight to the courts for legal remedy, she should have been treated in Ireland. But in fact, because she sought to leave the jurisdiction, they granted her permission to travel for termination. I contacted her counsel. I didn't recognise the name because I had pushed my own case behind me. The morning after I heard this on the news, and I explained to him what had been said in my case. And I only realised after he was the actual state counsel in my case, and he resigned from Miss D's case within hours. So that was 2007. On to 2012 then, and I'm still Deirdre de Barra as far as everything is concerned, and it's all forgotten. But I'm in a hotel in Malta on holidays, and I look up at a TV screen and I see an image of an Indian woman, and underneath on the Sky News banner it says, woman dies in Galway hospital after being denied a termination, and I assumed there was a Galway in India. And of course it was here. I realized at that moment that everything I had tried to do to save other women from my fate had come to nothing, and now a woman was dead. I am ignoring the ins and outs of Savita's case because, in terms of people have argued it wasn't because she was denied termination and it was for something else. As far as I'm concerned, that's what I feel, and that's when the inquest also suggests that to me. I felt that I should have gone public at the human rights case, and it might have had a stronger effect. And I felt profoundly guilty and became quite depressed. My boys were now in their 20s, and I thought that the trauma of 2002 had gone away, but it was still there. 2013, there was, as we all know, days and weeks of debate and discussion over the protection of life during pregnancy bill, but there was nothing in it about fetal abnormality. Though my name and my case had been brought to the attention of the Oireachtas hearings, again, the issue was not going to be addressed. Also in 2013, it was the moment I heard about the findings of the inquest into Savita Halappanavar that I decided enough was enough, and that my silence had had no effect and I needed to be heard. I discussed it with my children and my friends, and both of my sons fully supported my choice. They don't understand why we have these cruel laws that hurt women. So that's why I gave an interview, and that's how I ended up being at the hearings in the Oireachtas and being asked to write. And I cannot tell you the relief to let go of the other persona. And what I wouldn't have realised was that as soon as I did that, I could grieve, because it was Deirdre de Barra who had all the sympathy, consolation, and I was the one that nobody knew about and kept it all to myself. So just to give you an insight, and this is, I'm saying this is Chatham House rules. I'd prefer if it wasn't reported outside of this room, but I know it's a fact. So I want to tell you something that has given me closure, partial closure anyway. There won't be closure until there is a legal remedy for choice. I think it's wonderful that women who wish to go to full term have the choice to do that. So aside from I was an architectural historian, I had a planning practice. There's many reasons why I didn't want my obstetric and gynecological details out in the public domain. But now I'm training to be a barrister, so I am pretty determined to get the law changed. And 2 years ago, I was at a dinner in the Law Society. A woman approached me, a small woman with rosy cheeks. I thought she looked a little bit like a nun. And she said to me very quietly, I had great courage and I had done a very good thing and I should be very proud. And while I was in King's Inn studying in my first year, which was only a year and a half ago, the senior counsel who had been the expert witness for the state in Dee versus Ireland was there at a function. I'd never seen him before. And so afterwards I went over and introduced myself to him, and he stepped back as if I was going to throw an egg in his face or something. And we shook hands, and he said, it is a great honour to meet you, and that he'd always wanted to write to me. And I can't tell you again the comfort and closure that gave me. Because while the law is still so strict against women in this situation, we will always feel that some people think we are doing it, we have made the wrong choice, we've done something wrong. I met the senior counsel again at my conferring this year, and I said to him, my 2 boys are with me, those 2 little boys that are mentioned through all the cases, and he said, go and tell your sons that their mother is a heroine. that has given me great courage. And I ask now, why is it that politicians and religious interests hold such authority in a matter which, as far as I'm concerned, is between a patient and her doctor, and why the torture is allowed to continue? For the woman, as I said, who wishes to continue, the choice is there. So, in the name of my twins, Tom and Alex, who did not survive, and all of the Irish women who deserve the choice to have a pregnancy incompatible with survival terminated, I hope that the suffering will not continue. Thank you.